If we look at the world we inhabit, all of us have to admit that we endure it rather than enjoy it. I'm reminded of an anecdote of David Edelman's, the people's lawyer, who recounted a story of when he was in a restaurant, and casually asked a waitress whether or not she enjoyed school. Her reply was that, yes, she did indeed have good memories and went back to her duties. A few minutes later, however, she came back to David and said, "You know, when you asked me earlier if I enjoyed school, and I said yes. Well, I've been thinking about it and I think I used selective memory, and it wasn't very pleasant at all." This is the mindset of most of us, where we tend to accept the world we're offered, making the best of it, and it isn't until you think a little deeper that your true feelings manifest themselves. We have to examine what a world that we personally created would look like, and then compare it with the world we have. The excuses of having an elite section of society taking all of its resources while 99.9% of us live in relative misery doesn't fit with logic, yet this is the reality of our lives. Even though we're supposed to be at the top of the food chain, we're still expected to accept that life is a survival of the fittest challenge, where we negotiate our path through those wanting to take advantage of us at every turn. How many of us could truly say that we know several callous, calculating, selfish people personally, yet the view that this mindset is prolific among humanity is the result of being told that this is the case, so that actually our naive innocence assumes that mankind harbors a wicked subculture that we simply have to tolerate and exist among. This leads on to how our minds have been molded over generations as a consequence of relentless and brutal indoctrination. Think about the life cycle of a typical man or woman brought into this world. We have to be careful about using certain terminology, as this is part of the indoctrination we're exposed to, where words like person and human have different interpretations depending on the context used, which we'll discuss shortly. Even before birth, our mothers' bodies are infected with slow-acting poisons and heavy metals and the like, and during gestation we're bombarded with things like ultrasound in the womb, an extremely unsettling attack to say the least. When we arrive in this world from the comfort of our mother's body, we're snatched away from her, smacked and immediately disconnected, where we're whisked away after a brief consolation. Instead of having the support of a community, the mother is left largely to bring up the child, another sinister term, herself, where regular interventions by the health service will prey on it to be injected with synthetic poisons. The natural mother's milk will be actively discouraged in favor of yet more synthetically produced formulas, all of its food prepared with fluoridated and chlorinated water, and put in front of a television screen to be bombarded with low-quality images and messages. Not long after they can walk, they are then whisked off to school, where a figure stands at the head of the class dictating what the child should be aware of, and discouraged from speaking with the others around them. They'll be coerced into obeying authority, speak when spoken to and don't think for yourself, with regimented routines of breaks and lunches like a clockwork army. As they grow, they eat foods that have had toxins like glyphosate sprayed on the crops and a constant battering with EMF frequencies from a multitude of electronic devices. As an adult, they'll be divided into specific age groups, discouraged from interacting with anyone other than a partner and 2.4 children in their residential prison cell, indoctrinated into seeing voting as an independent tool of personal control and compete within the job market, using the lowest instincts of greed, ego and selfishness to achieve more wealth. We are taxed on everything we buy, all to go towards a beneficial government overseeing our safety and comfort like a benevolent uncle. We are told things like you can't take it with you, and you only go around once, encouraging an attitude of selfishness and atheism, until we succumb to death and the state demands payment from those you leave behind to simply get rid of your body and fund any outstanding debt. Would you or anyone you know devise such a system? Be in no doubt, the lives we live aren't controlled by the vast majority, but rather a tiny cult that spreads its tentacles into every minutiae of our time here. We're led to believe that all of our institutions, whether it be for health, education, law, media or government, have developed organically, and are manned by well-intentioned supervisors who use the powers given to them to make our lives better in as fair a way as possible, whereas the opposite is true. All of the organs of control have been manufactured well in advance and are ultimately owned by the tiny fraction of 1% of the world's population, where CEOs appoint gatekeepers throughout the command structure to trick us into thinking that the health service is to look after our well-being, the education services and media to inform us, and government and the law to ensure fairness. The whole system is held together using the maxim that you obey, trust and believe your supervisor. All of this results in the indoctrination we receive, not only through school but also further education and skills training, forcing us to accept a fantasy, reinforced by films, documentaries and news reports, and we have to try and unravel the multitude of threads holding this gargantuan deception together. If you thought that the timeline and lifestyle control were the biggest deceptions, then I'm about to embark on an even more shocking exposé, with details of just how deep the deception really is. To illustrate where I'm going with this, let's set out a little story. A ship with 100 passengers is stranded on a desert island, with a twist. Only 2 are adults, a young couple, and the other 98 are toddlers. Now a normal, responsible adult would set to work finding a way of getting back home, but these 2 are far from normal, responsible adults, and devise a way of using this situation to their advantage by making the growing children their slaves and ensuring a privileged life for them and their offspring. They'd have to formulate an intricate narrative, where the toddlers grow up believing that their role in life is to serve the adults and their family, and this is the natural order of things. The island is actually only about 50 miles from another larger, inhabited island. But if the toddlers are taught that they are in the middle of a vast, endless ocean, then they wouldn't have even the concept of escape, let alone the knowledge of how other people live a slavery-free life. This then brings us to a massive deception. Since our first days at school, where we probably had a world globe in the classroom, we've been raised on the idea that we exist on a spinning ball in the middle of a vast universe. Hollywood and popular culture has kept readers and audiences spellbound with tales of traveling to other worlds, after we ourselves sent men to the moon with visions of populating other worlds out there. The subject of the true shape of our world involves so much evidence and intuition-based logic that it would take an entire book in itself to itemize all its details. Suffice to say that every flat earther was once a believer in the spinning globe model, and whereas many globe believers have become flat earthers, no flat earther anyone knows has gone back to believing in the globe model. I urge anyone truly interested in obtaining a balanced view of this subject to research Eric Dubé's 200 Proofs and Dave Weiss on a, so far, independent platform like BitChute, to try and explain as briefly as possible how this deception is achieved. The land masses of a level pond, ironically as seen on many official emblems such as the UN flag, have been depicted as being wrapped around a ball instead of essentially being spread across a plate. A staggering consequence of this is that what we think of as the frozen island of Antarctica is in fact an ice wall around the perimeter of this plate when unfolded back to its true form. Please don't ask the usual questions, particularly so where's the edge? It's a graphic display of our conditioning to think that we nonchalantly accept an infinite universe out there, yet revert to questioning the validity of an endless plane. This preconception has also been used by those trying to debunk its reality by mockingly displaying illustrations of a plate floating in space. For those new to this concept, please don't assume that those of us discovering this information weren't absolutely shocked or even traumatized by its revelation. This massive deception has served a multitude of purposes. Just like the castaway toddlers, so the Earth's inhabitants aren't even aware of possible lands beyond that ice wall and assume they are trapped on this island globe spinning through the vastness of space. What if we are not the only perimeter of this realm whose borders are masked? What I mean is, if there are concentric rings of ice walls radiating out, then the occupants of the spaces between them could all be being told they are an isolated planet in space. What if we aren't even the center, and our supposed Arctic region is simply a twisted version of a concentric circle with a land beyond that? The whole idea of space has been engineered in possibly the largest, most intricate psychological operation ever carried out by these controllers, under the umbrella control of NASA. As with the flat Earth debate, NASA's true role and the depth of its deceit would encompass its own large volume of evidence, but the blatant fakery is central to understanding how so many people woke up to their lies. The entire reason for NASA's existence is to reinforce the globe model, and is simply an extension of the Hollywood fantasy factory. If we take just one example, there are multiple videos detailing how the so-called Challenger disaster of 1986 was a total fabrication, where 6 of the 7 supposed fatalities are not only still alive, but haven't even changed their names, protected and rewarded by the system for their loyalty. The idea of a vulnerable planet at the mercy of being destroyed by meteorites, invading aliens or a host of other threats is simply another convenient scare tactic in their playbook. We have to be made to feel, not only vulnerable and in need of government protection, but also made to feel insignificant, an accident of nature with no true purpose, simply an offshoot of monkey ancestors trying to take what we can from these few years of existence. Everything else from dinosaurs to nuclear weapons has been contrived with this specific purpose, to keep us in fear and feeling vulnerable and insignificant, and it's worked perfectly for them, so far. We have to first look at how they've controlled us up until now with the concepts of money and registration. The simplest way to explain what money is to first think about how the simplest forms of trade would operate, the barter system. If you wanted a lean-to built, you enlist someone to construct it for you, maybe giving them a pig in return, or someone could give you a lift into market in exchange for some vegetables. The trade always has to be agreed upon so that both parties are happy with the arrangement. Now, as societies become more complex, with technical innovations involving a multitude of production, research, designing and the actual materials used, it becomes impossible to trade with every avenue involved, and this is where the concept of money comes into play. Let's imagine we all do a particular job, whether it be a farmer, taxi driver or whatever, and we have monitors with clipboards logging how much we work individually. Each 5 minutes we work gets a tick on the sheet, and at the end of the week we reclaim our tokens. Let's say that there's a central factory with a large bucket, and each tick on the sheet has been matched with a small lead pellet dropping into the bucket. We can see that these lead pellets are a vivid representation of the labor, wealth of that community, and we then line up at the factory to receive our portion of them using those ticks to share them out. We now can see those pellets as pound or dollar coins, and it's a stark example of how our labor has been transformed into a tangible asset. The problem is that those who've put themselves in charge of this system now control, not only how this wealth is apportioned, but also the truth of how much wealth is actually there at all. This is the great money swindle, where the principle of each country having stocks of gold, silver or whatever tangible asset you want in the vaults representing that wealth, can quite simply be lied about. They can literally print money,